It's been a little while since I've covered an M. Night Shyamalan project, especially since his name has been in theaters. The last time I saw him, he just released Old, and I haven't seen that yet. I really want to. But the last time I saw him in theaters was Glass, and I am still a bit confounded by the ending, admittedly, all these years later, but I loved watching the movie. I had a great experience, too, going with a bunch of people that didn't have the exposure that I did to the franchise of Glass, and that I was the only one there who'd seen Split. Some others had seen Unbreakable, but I had a really good time with Glass, and as a work, and not just in the audience experience, but as a work, it was incredibly engaging. So the prospect of seeing him again in theaters, and I know he's been doing pretty well in the TV landscape as well, given The Servant show is now to its 4th season. I haven't looked at that yet, but it looked good, at least from what I saw of it initially on season 1. I covered that a while ago, but although it's not published yet. I'm so behind in getting things uploaded. Anyway, Knock at the Cabin is his newest release. And this sounds pretty interesting. It's based on a book, as I understand. I've not read the novel. And there's a lot of draws here in regards to casting, specifically in terms of big names. Dave Bautista. He's in a lot of fare these days. I think a lot of people are going to immediately approach me based on that attribution alone. Rupert Grint, I'm sure all the Harry Potter fans are going to jump on board with that. I know he's a bit of a heartthrob, and an M. Night Shyamalan mainstay. I mean, he's in Servant right now. Or I think he probably still is. At least he was at the time of the first season. Anyway, I don't know. Again, I need to catch up on that show. And a couple other names as well, apart from that, including Jonathan Groff, I'm a big fan of, and Ben, I forget his name at the moment, Aldridge. His name is rising a bit in terms of popularity. He's on the Pennyworth show. He was recently in that Jim Parsons movie he co-led with what was it called? Spoiler alert. I haven't looked at that yet. I had a special video planned in mind for that. But I'm brought in on the prospect. Now, I will say again, I'm looking at this with a limited exposure. While I might like to approach works again from getting a baseline perspective on the book, I've dabbled with this in the past. For example, in terms of adaptation projects, there's not always a perfect translation. Some are close, approximates, but usually it's a universal truth that not every project in its translation is perfect, right? In the past, though, in terms of adaptations, I've considered projects in terms of watching them or even covering them, right? Do I read the book first or do I watch the project? I want to kind of go into this fresh, to just have that type of feeling within me, maybe by comparison, let's say, to other projects like Hillbilly Elegy. I still haven't watched that yet, but I read the book first. Or with Dune, I went and watched the movie first. So I make different decisions here from time to time. I'm really interested in the prospect, though, of M. Night Shyamalan. I don't know if I'm going to watch this yet in theaters. I've got a lot of other stuff I want to, get through and stuff I need to cover. But I'm curious just on that element alone because I'm a big fan of his. And I've seen plenty of his projects to, again, know his caliber of craft. If you're not familiar with Knock at the Cabin, I'm going to make some remarks in a minute before we get into the trailers. But to give you a general baseline, if you're not familiar with it, this is the pitch according to IMDb. While vacationing, a girl and her parents are taken hostage by armed strangers who demand that the family makes a choice to avert the apocalypse. That's a very dramatic scope. I mean, it certainly fits with the suspense thriller type dynamic that M. Night Shyamalan has done in the past. I'm curious again to see the atmosphere. In this case, in terms of characters, I believe Ben Aldridge and Jonathan Groff. Again, I'm a big fan of the first. And Ben Aldridge, I'm open to and seeing more of his performances. I still have not watched Pennyworth yet, but I said I would a while ago. But they are playing the parents. And just to note it, this is, if you're not familiar with the book, or at least even just the general pitch, they're playing married parents. So, just to set it apart, not to make a big thing of this, but I've made it no secret on this channel that I'm a Christian, so maybe you can consider my point of view on that, just a bit, but the M. Night Shyamalan attribution is a big attraction point to me. And these casting choices, I'm curious. Let me at least give a look on it and see what I can glean from it based on 2 trailers I have pulled up. And I have heard from at least some audience perspective of what I've heard, and this was kind of a consideration of me of how preachy might this movie get, right? Because I could see it wavering that way. Apparently it's not. I've heard from many people that it's actually very tame in presentation, specific on elements, again, I could see being very active in the realm of social discourse, probably Twitter, admittedly. Apparently this doesn't go necessarily down the overly preachy route and is more concentrated on telling a well-constructed thriller. So let's take a look and see, though, what I think about it. I want to be fair in terms of judging the quality, again, as an M. Night fan. I'm very curious. Let's take a look, though, at the first trailer. I'll just feed right into the second one right after, and we'll get a good look at Knock at the Cabin from somebody who's a complete novice on the story. But I can certainly judge from familiarity of a talent that M. Night Shyamalan has offered many times. Even if, again, I still find that ending to Glass very weird. A bit dissatisfying, admittedly. All these years later. They use that music a lot.
Are we gonna sing along?
Yes, of course!
I wanna put on my boogie shoes.
Yeah!
The presentation of the actors, I think, is great. Like I said, performance-wise, I haven't seen much of Ben Aldridge. Though he's forgotten the British accent again. Jonathan Groff has a charisma that is very approachable. Here comes Dave Bautista. Yeah, with that build, she's probably like, who's that guy? Why is he here? And it's such nice dress in the forest. Yeah, it's kind of suspicious.
My name's Leonard. Well, it's nice to meet you, Wim.
Why are you here?
I suppose I'm here to make friends with you. And your dad's too. But my heart is broken.
Why is it broken?
She's a very engaging child actress. As many these days that tend to be. I'm curious to gauge the capabilities of her performance. I've got a good tease right now.
It looks like a pick with a chain and a mallet head.
You see, the four of us have a very important job to do. In fact, it might be the most important job in the history of the world.
Suspenseful introduction. The confusion for this young girl, though. She's like, why exactly, is this guy being nice to me and suddenly banging down the door? It's a good contained thriller.
We were called and are united by a common vision, which has now become a command that we cannot ignore. The four of us are here to prevent the apocalypse. Your family has been chosen to make a horrible decision. If you fail to choose, the world will end.
Well, dire stakes. What's the choice? For those of us like myself who are like, we haven't read the book yet. And there's a question of, if any book adaptation is, faithfulness. I mean, I don't know how many liberties this might be taking. Maybe it's very faithful. Who knows? I mean, again, like I said, M. Night Shyamalan at this point, everybody would be well-reasoned to believe he's a very competent filmmaker, especially on craft. His presentations are great. I mean, I think all the way back to The Sixth Sense, and he's a phenomenal filmmaker in his range of talent. And this, granted, it does come across, at least in depiction, I'm not saying this in regards to quality. It's much cheaper in scope. Like a lot of horror films are these days, given the location. It's very much contained to this cabin. It's isolated. It's in a forest setting. You could have picked anywhere to film this. I'm imagining by his familiarity, unless I find out differently, this is probably around Philadelphia. I understand that's sort of his provision of choice on where to film, location-wise. But it looks good in terms of delivery. It is very much secluded, suspenseful. I think the actors are very engaging on performances, especially Jonathan Groff. And again, like I said, I have relative unfamiliarity of Ben Aldridge performance-wise. Even though I will say, based on the projects I'm aware of and how many he's been in lately, his star seems to be rising in prominence. Both come across to me as very competent and engaging in performances. And this young actress, what's her name again? Kristen. Feel free to clarify down below again if I'm mispronouncing her name. I do this all the time, and I know it's a risk I run, and I try to be more informed. I'm open to being told I'm wrong on this point. Kristen, is it Qui or is it Chi? It's probably not Chi, because that'd be C-H-I. I don't know. I'm going to say Qui for lack of a more informed perspective of what I should maybe have going in. She seems to be doing a pretty good job. I think the camaraderie between her and Dave Bautista, at least in the engaging, while yes, there's a terrifying and unnerving nature to it, especially when all four of him and his compatriots walk up to the door, I think the exchange she has of him presents a good performance. So, maybe I'm divided at least on some elements I've made mention of, but, I don't want to necessarily dwell on too much, because I do want to judge the film on a competence level, and I'm curious to see the story evolve. As an M. Night fan, I think that's a good first tease. Let's consult the second trailer and see what, I think about it.
Hi there. Can I talk to you for a little bit?
Didn't both these guys, think of, or maybe they weren't taught don't talk to strangers, and so it's not a lesson they're imparting.
When we're talking about.
Can you open the door, please?
They're breaking in. I got you, baby.
We're not here to hurt you, but you have to stay here in the cabin with us. Families throughout history.
Like, why is that the only decision?
Your family must choose to willingly sacrifice one of the three of you to prevent the apocalypse.
We're not sacrificing anyone.
For every no you give us,
That's a
hundreds of thousands of people are going to die.
interesting scope to the story.
It's really happening.
Sweetheart, close your eyes.
Will you?
Noah's flood. I'm kidding.
Somehow trust us.
We're normal people just like you.
It doesn't matter.
That's what it looks like to me.
We will never choose anyone.
Well, admittedly, I think the world is given perhaps enough reason that God has promised that will never happen again, but Revelation presents other destinations.
I'm afraid the rule is that no one's allowed to leave until you choose.
Do you really think it's all just a coincidence?
I have to believe that.
My son is gonna die.
His name is Charlie.
As a mother,
I am begging you.
You're the only one who can stop this. Andrew, I saw something. There was something in the light. I feel it now.
I'm taking my family and I'm leaving.
If you fail to choose, the world will perish.
We've been given the chance to decide the fate of everyone.
Time's running out on the world.
I'm scared. There is nothing more flawed and perfect in this world than our family.
Please make a choice.
Always together. Always together.
Well, it's very modern.
I will ask for the last time. Will you make a choice?
Who would you pick in that situation? Right? I mean, that's a dark question to consider. You look at the members of your family and like, I don't know who I'd pick. It's a dark prospect in terms of a discussion point. You want to consider bringing that around the dining room table? Like, well, I love you, but you're not good enough. So you're first on line. If the apocalypse happens and the mass tsunami comes in, or the light, again, I'm looking at this from a complete novice perspective as to, I couldn't know the inner facets of the story. So if I do watch this movie, that's going to be an evolved vision in regards to story, and that would be my first exposure most likely. Because I'm curious to engage with it just basically, again, it's a question, again, I throw around quite a bit. Do I start with the book adaptation or do I start with the movie? I'm just, again, really curious again on the M. Night attribution. That's the immediate go-to, and some of the casting here. Maybe even less of a story, but it seems a good, a very sophisticated suspense thriller. And I will say as well with Universal, in comparison to other films incorporating modern, or in this case, let's say more rainbow-adjacent material, this is much more of a competent delivery in comparison to some of their past offerings. I'm thinking, for example, like Bros. I mean, that film did not turn out that well at all. This, other than maybe a couple moments in the scripting, it doesn't come across as too preachy. Instead, it seems more so like a substantial movie, where it's like telling me as the audience member, this is the modern way things are now. And it's like, well, I know. I can walk in the world and see that around me. That was kind of I didn't cover Bros. I hadn't, like I said with spoiler alert, I had an idea in mind, and both the two tied together. Maybe I'll evolve that, even if I'm late on everything, so it wouldn't be a surprise if you look, I'm like, you're covering that now? I know, I cover everything late. Trust me. If you're not familiar with much of my work, I have been in a catch-up phase for a number of years, and I'm still making my way through a lot of older projects. But, I'm curious to see some of the art perhaps that I missed, and there's a lot of movie and TV releases these days. Projects get lost in the shuffle all the time, whether they be more well-established or lesser known. By comparison, again, like I said, this comes across more as a sophisticated thriller in principal focus, where the addendum is you have, two guys with an adopted daughter here. Then that's just more so a side point. So again, like I said, maybe I have some of my thoughts on that, even just an individual point of view, if I don't mean to intentionally in any way be too disrespectful, even in making that necessarily a main point of conversation, other than engaging with this particular release on the M. Night Shyamalan level. That's what immediately brings me in. Execution-wise, it looks like a good suspense thriller, with a very mysterious story as presented in the trailers. There's a lot more veiled. And from what I've heard, the response, at least again, on, well, generally to the movie, from what I've heard some say it's not good, but from at least, I tend to engage more with audiences than I do critics in terms of faith perspectives, or good faith opinions made on movies these days. And from the audience of what I've listened to, I've heard exemplary remarks on quality. I'd be curious to know if you're somebody who's viewed Knock at the Cabin. Again, I'm covering this late, so it's in theaters at this point. I just made it in. In fact, I think I'm looking at this on the first weekend. Without spoilers, if you can refrain from it, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and your opinion on the movie. Because again, I like to gauge with the audience perspective better than I do the usual, typical outlets. What is your opinion on it? And for those of you maybe you're looking at this from a first perspective, what do you think about it? And maybe you have, a mixture of opinion as well. I know M. Night has received that, at least of some of his work. I even had that same takeaway with Glass, to some extent. I did, even though I thought the movie was a great experience and overwhelmingly was a very enjoyable watch, especially on acting. He gets some great casting attributions. I mean, Glass was just phenomenal, at least in that respect. James McAvoy, love the guy. Anyway, Knock at the Cabin, though, I'd be curious to hear if you want to disclose your perspective down below, what you think on it. I'm generally curious. Again, like I said, I don't know anything of the story, but M. Night Shyamalan is an approachable element. I don't know if I'm going to watch this maybe on streaming or in the theaters. I mean, I have a lot of catch-up work to do for many other projects, and it's hard for me to get in the theater these days a lot of the time, even though I do try. So some of these films, unfortunately, unfortunately, I still try and watch, and appreciate them as, art whenever I can. Maybe this will be a streaming access for me. I'm not exactly sure. I think on scope, to me, it comes across more that way, if I'm being honest, because of its smaller vision, other than maybe on story, just in the visual presentation of what's tangible, at least in the visual imagery. But I'm curious about it. Again, I might have some thoughts on it, just personally speaking, but I sense a competence to it. And I would believe that, again, being very familiar with M. Night's talents. And I think with Knock at the Cabin, that's no exception. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before you bounce, feel free to drop a like and comment, subscribe to this channel with a ding on the bell, and share this video with your friends. And consider checking out the description here. There you'll find links to my other channels, as well as addresses to my other social media accounts and ways you can help support my work if you feel so inclined. May God bless you, and looking forward to when our paths cross again.